It's easy to see how you might pick up some rivalries once you're fighting the other drivers, but some seem to have more than others. Magnussen is set to return to the track this season, but is anyone really that glad to see him? Maybe not. Magnussen has a lot of enemies in the paddock. Which driver called him stupid? And how did he insult the work of his mechanics? Stay tuned to find out all that and more. Pierre Gasly got a taste of Magnussen's driving at the 2018 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Pierre first said that he was concerned about Magnussen's driving during a practice session when he was cut off by the Haas driver. Then, in the race, Pierre was squeezed into a wall by Magnussen. This led to Gasly labeling Magnussen the most dangerous driver that he has ever driven against. Magnussen's excuse was that an earlier collision had damaged his mirrors and meant that he couldn't see where Gasly was. But this excuse didn't change his feelings. Funnily enough though, Magnussen was a key reason why Gasly was able to win his first Grand Prix at Mazda in 2020. First, in qualifying, he overshot a corner and had to run wide, which meant that Kvyat behind him was not able to benefit from a slipstream. That meant that Kvyat started down in 11th and on a hard rather than soft tire. The second incident was when Magnussen's Haas lost power and caused a safety car. The pit lane was closed just after Gasly had pitted, and so he had fresh tires. To top it all off, Hamilton's team didn't realize the pit lane was closed and called him in, which got him a stop-go penalty and cleared the way for Gasly's fairy tale win. You see, Gasly, you really should be thanking Magnussen for his dangerous driving, because without it, you may not have a Formula 1 victory to your name. Now we have Fernando Alonso. During a practice session at the 2018 British Grand Prix, Magnussen was getting on the nerves of McLaren driver Fernando Alonso. Magnussen can be seen overtaking and cutting off Alonso, which led to Alonso complaining on the radio to his team. He called Magnussen a dangerous driver, accusing the Haas driver of trying to hit him. Then, in a qualifying session later that year in Italy, Magnussen had another tussle with Alonso. In a warm-up lap going into a qualifying lap, Magnussen thought that Alonso was going slowly and sped past to overtake him. But immediately after, Alonso caught back up with him, got a slipstream for his flying lap, and then tried to retake the position on the first turn. This ended in disaster when they both collided and ruined their qualifying chances. Magnussen said after the race that there was no way he was going to let Alonso overtake him after getting the slipstream from him. He doesn't have much respect for the two-time world champion and said that Alonso thinks he's God on the racetrack. He also said that Alonso approached him after the race to laugh at him and that he couldn't wait for the day that Alonso retired. Alonso has definitely had some fiery words to say about rivals in the past, but Magnussen's comments were pretty ugly words to hear between drivers. Alonso refused to comment on Magnussen's insults and chose to take the high road instead. Good for you, Alonso. We can all take a leaf out of that book. Next, Romain Grosjean. The battle of the teammates. This is the hardest thing for an F1 boss to control. Magnussen was the teammate of Romain Grosjean at Haas from 2017 to 2020. Grosjean arrived at the team a year earlier than Magnussen, and so he had a little more time to settle in. The Haas drivers were constantly complaining about each other on the track to the race engineers. Grosjean said that this was normal and that they were just momentary outbursts, but the way they were racing against each other showed that there was a lot of tension between the two. They had a number of racing incidents, including colliding in the 2019 German Grand Prix, and then again at the Spanish Grand Prix. It was a sign of hard racing from two drivers fighting for points, but team boss Gunther Steiner was furious with them for their behavior. The worst incident was at the 2019 British Grand Prix when the two drivers collided on the first lap. The impact caused a puncture on both of their cars, and they were called into the pits for a tire change. After the pit stop, it was clear that the damage was much deeper, so they were both called into the garage to retire. Who had conflict with Magnussen from his very own team? And which driver called Magnussen stupid? Now, let's talk about Nico Hülkenberg. Nico Hülkenberg probably won't be the first person to congratulate Magnussen on his return to Formula 1. The two had a lot of conflict when they drove against each other, and plenty of words were exchanged. Famously, after an incident at the 2017 Hungarian Grand Prix, Magnussen was being interviewed when he was confronted by Hülkenberg by sarcastically congratulating him. The incident on the track was when Hülkenberg tried to overtake Magnussen and he was pushed wide by the Haas driver. The stewards agreed with Hülkenberg and gave Magnussen a 5-second penalty for forcing another driver off track. This led to Hülkenberg describing Magnussen as the most unsporting driver out of all the F1 drivers. During his interview, Magnussen's response to Hülkenberg interrupting his interview was to tell him to suck a certain part of his body that is best left to the imagination. Geez, Magnussen, why don't you two get a room already? Up next, Charles Leclerc. It takes a lot to rattle Charles Leclerc. The Monegasque is normally cool, calm, and collected, but if anyone can do it, it's Magnussen. There are two incidents in particular. The first was a practice session for the 2018 Spanish Grand Prix. Leclerc was trying to overtake Magnussen on the main straight when Magnussen veered right and almost ran Leclerc off the track. The second incident was later in the year at the Japanese Grand Prix and was almost exactly the same, but with much bigger consequences. It was only lap 2 and Leclerc was following closely behind Magnussen. He was drifting to the right in a standard overtaking move when Magnussen suddenly swerved to the right and caused Leclerc to run into the back of him. Leclerc had to pit stop because of a broken front wing before retiring later in the race. Magnussen retired his Haas much sooner from a tire puncture and floor damage. Magnussen was sure that it was simply a racing incident and no one was at fault, but Charles was much less neutral. He said that it was clearly dangerous driving and that Magnussen was and will always be stupid. We've seen Leclerc call himself stupid before, but if he's calling you stupid, you really must have done something wrong. Next, the team. He has to be kidding me. Magnussen may have made some enemies at his own team too. This was a day after he crashed his car in qualifying at the final corner of the circuit. Magnussen blamed the crash on bad luck. The crash meant that the team had to repair the gearbox, meaning that Magnussen had to start from the pit lane. After the race, he described the car as the worst experience he's ever had in a racing car. His race engineer was quick to shut Magnussen down though. He reminded him of how much work the mechanics had to do on the car overnight because of his crash. Then, Haas boss Gunther Steiner stepped in and put a stop to the argument. Magnussen did apologize after the race, but surely there would have been some hard feelings back at the garage. How would you feel if you had spent all night working on somebody else's mistake only for them to call it terrible? Magnussen left the team at the end of 2020 to make way for Mick Schumacher, the son of 7-time world champion Michael Schumacher, and Nikita Mazepin, a big source of funding. If you can't get along with your own team, how much chance do you have of making friends in the paddock? So what does Magnussen think? An interview in 2018 gave an insight into how Magnussen approaches Formula 1. He said that he doesn't pay attention to what the press or fans are saying about him. He also said that he doesn't care. In an F1 Instagram Live interview a couple of years later, Magnussen admitted that at some times in his career he has overstepped the line, but has said that all drivers on the grid do at times. In large part, his collisions with other drivers may be because of how frustrated he was at Haas. After leaving in 2020, he said that he had an offer to stay in F1 for the following year, but that the team would be uncompetitive like Haas was. He said that he imagined fighting for championships, and when it never happened, it was pretty disappointing. That's fair enough. Formula 1 has only 20 seats available, and it's difficult enough to get in. But to be stuck in a job with no possibility of promotion, well, wouldn't you quit after a while? What do you think of Kevin Magnussen's driving? Is he a dangerous driver? And what do you think about his off-track comments? Is he a sportsman? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.